one holy and undivided Trinity.
Amen.
I invite you to sit. Today we get the story, many stories, but of Elijah, one of our grand, humble, bold prophets, a prophet who prays and works for justice for people. So remember, he lived during a time that was very difficult in believing in God and being a just and praying person. Time of King Ahab, 9th century BCE. And Elijah was one who prayed so intensely and worked so much for the underdog that his prayers, people were able to see that God was through this man. And Elijah would pray, let it not rain. And it didn't rain for 3 years, which kept people paying attention to him and his communication with God. That wasn't, made him successful enough as a faithful person to have God listening to him in such a direct, tangible way. Elijah probably secured one of the most successful victories in the Old Testament. Remember the story at Mount Carmel where he stood in front of 450 opponents, or people who thought opposite of Elijah, who were worshiping Baal in a grand celebration. And Elijah said, "You have gone astray. God is God, not Baal. The practices that you are doing are not of God's." And he stands before them so boldly, and again he commands, "God, send fire from heaven." And God does. He has a great link to God. And then, the story goes that people were able to turn in their ways and kind of see a new way, and then it rained. Elijah, I would say, would probably, in contemporary context, win the Times Man of the Year. Definitely, he's the one for God. So the irony, though, that caught my attention this week as I read and immersed myself in Scripture is that when he receives a death threat, which I'm sure he's received many before by hundreds of people, but when he receives a death threat from wicked King Jezebel, what does Elijah do? He kind of puts his tail between his legs and he runs. He escapes. And so our bold, faithful, just prophet gets deflated and scared, intimidated. Have you ever been there before? When you're at the top of your game and you're successful, you're employing all the right practices, and then maybe it's not as dramatic, hopefully, as a death threat, although that does happen. Maybe it's a judgmental glance, a negative email, a rejection, a judgment. It is something that deflates the ego and puts us in that spin, just like Elijah, where we question it all, maybe. Who am I? Who am I? What am I doing here? Is this all for naught? Elijah, here in the passage, feels mighty alone. And he's depressed here, angry, he's scared. And so what he does, my question to you also is, when I think we could all get in times and places in our lives where we get scared or we get insecure. So what do? Where do you go? Elijah, the first thing he does is we know that he kind of goes on a guy's weekend to Beersheba, but he does more than that. That doesn't fully fix him or center him again. He goes on a 40-day and 40-night spiritual pilgrimage quest. That should put a lot of like, oh, that's a really good idea. You know, Moses, Noah, Jesus, Elijah, this is a practice we're invited into. So Elijah goes on this 40-day walk in the woods. He unplugs, he gets out, he talks directly and honestly to God. He's angry. He says things like, God, I've been so faithful to you, the God of hosts. The Israelites, all your people, have forsaken your covenant. And I have been so faithful. I am consistent. I am faithful where everybody else isn't going to church. They're tearing down your altars. They're killing your prophets, people who are speaking justice, like me. I am alone and left. I'm done. Take my life. Take it away. Sounds like he is having a pretty good pity party along his way here. And I think about Martha and Mary. Maybe you're more familiar with that more New Testament story. Remember how Martha is like, Jesus, I'm doing all the work here, and my sister is just sitting there paying attention to you, but I'm the one doing the dishes. I've made the dinner. I've prepared people to come to my home. I've sent out the invitations. Like, can you please pay attention to me? And not that any of these things I think are wrong. For me, this week, I found real comfort in the fact of, like, I complain. I have pity parties. I want to be able to talk like that honestly to God, too. We don't want to stay there, though. So Elijah is attentive to his conversations with God. And this quest, this 40-day praying and fasting until he can hear God's voice. So he's having this honest dialogue with God, and we read that there was strong wind that was like shattering rocks, there was an earthquake, there was fire, there's all this drama. I know he's going up to his mountaintop experience. This often is a great way for us to be in conversation with our God. Go summit some mountains. He's walking and he doesn't hear God or connect with God in any of that drama, like other people have, for sure. But this doesn't work for Elijah at this time. What happens is Elijah hears God ask him a question. So God questions Elijah and says, she says, "Who are you?" And Elijah sits in a long silence, it says. And he hears the sound of sheer silence. He wraps his face and he comes out of the cave. Maybe the cave of his heart, maybe a literal cave. And he sits in that silence and he feels God with him. Elijah needed silence. I think we really need this too. I think we all really need silence. We all read that our society is a society that feels more alone than we ever have in history. You know, and again, the irony. is that we are like more connected with Twitter and social media and globalization and living in proximity, but that people feel alone. Elijah felt alone. We all have moments where we feel alone. The silence that Elijah was able to hold allowed Elijah, it was the practice or the way that Elijah was able to hear the voice, the whisper, the soft truth that God was with him. That he was erroneous thinking that he was feeling that he was alone. St. John of the Cross said that silence is God's first language and that the rest of it is all translation. You know, our desert fathers and mothers, the Dalai Lama, our mystics, all point toward silence and how important that practice is. As I often say, it's not the end. Silence is not the end, but I think for Elijah and this story that we get today, I think the heart of this story is that Elijah would say, we all need to make space and room to be silent. Despair needs space and room for silence. And maybe you don't escape, maybe you don't run away, maybe you don't have the opportunity to take a 40-day walk along the Pacific Crest Trail. But we all are able to make space and room to be quiet. And I advise that this morning because, not only because we are so noisy in our culture and as people, there are so many things vying for our attention. Our consciousness is just spinning and running. Our self-reflexive talk is constant. So when we are quiet, we hold silence. What we are doing, that very practice, really is letting the ego that we're constantly feeding naturally, we're kind of letting it die or letting it go so that we are filled up with our being is good. God told Elijah, you are good. God said to Elijah, I am your companion. And then God says, wake up. Well, the angel said, wake up. Then God said, there are over 7,000 people who have not bowed down to Baal. You have work to do. There is so much justice left to be done in your place. There is so much prayer that still needs to be had. There is centeredness that you have yet to be experienced. Go back home and go do your work. And Elijah is only able to hear that again because of the quest that he went on. So my prayer for us is that we can stop running away. We can befriend our consciousness. We can sit. We can be even angry with God. But that we hold that time and space so that you really know that God is still speaking to you.